So I have a little, I say little and it's like 40 slides, PowerPoint to show first. I'll warn you, it's going to be a lot of information. Don't feel overwhelmed. You take what resonates with you and leave what doesn't. I'm going to go through a little bit of everything in the process. I feel like informing folks about a top-down view of archives is always the best way to start. And then when you go home and you think of your collection, things that your institution might have, you take what resonates and leave what doesn't. So a little bit of everything. In general, though, we're going to start with some really broad principles of archives, a lot of words that you might hear over and over again, things that I tend to throw around willy-nilly without realizing that some people don't know what these words mean. It will go over some like risk management strategies. This is everything from pest control and light, water control, things like that. We're going to talk a little bit about identifying what contamination looks like. If you're not familiar with what active mold looks like on a book, you might be a little frightened to see it at first. Then we're going to talk about processing. So this is getting into the nitty-gritty. If you walk into a room with a bunch of material, what are you supposed to do with it? Then we'll talk about some supplies at the end. I'll show you guys what we use here at the museum and then some equivalent items that you can get kind of at a more accessible base. There's some places where you can make some, cheaper decisions and some places where it might not be best to skimp out, but I'll be totally honest with you guys when it comes to what's worth it and what isn't, I promise. So we're just gonna get started with the big and broad. So one of the big overall ideas when we talk about owning information and owning materials and archives is intellectual and physical control. The physical control is pretty easy to identify. That's where physically is this, who has the physical power to control where this collection is, who's making sure it's locked in a room, who's making sure that room is climate controlled. So in our case, the Pequot Museum, we have our own archive storage. In some cases, we store things for other tribes or other institutions, and that's where we have storage agreements. The intellectual control is understanding the intrinsic value of those items. It's not so much about physically where it is, it's what is it and why do we have it? Why is this an important story to tell? And how do we best tell that story? So we're going to do that through things like description. We're going to do finding aids, which we'll talk about in a little while, and understanding the material before we give it to the general public and start exhibiting things and talking about fun items. A lot of times we talk about intellectual versus physical as compared to what you see in libraries. So in libraries, if you go over to the stacks, you're going to see classification numbers, and that'll give you a hint as to the subject of the book, as well as the location of the book. But in archives, the physical location doesn't really tell us anything about what's in the collection. So instead, we're forced to find some creative methods when it comes to descriptions, which is where things like finding aids are going to come in handy later on. And when we talk about how to organize our collections, a lot of it comes from the donors. So in a lot of cases, you'll see in archives something being described as the Emma Kushman papers. So that'll tell you who the donor is and the collection. Because in the grand scheme of things, we're not mixing things from multiple donors. A donor indicates the collection, and then underneath the collection, you can subdivide and organize it as you see fit. But in general, the collection is all going to come from one place. It's going to come from one person, one institution. It could be from another library or another museum or an organization, anything like that. But this was just to show you, I'm a very visual person. I like being able to see the little charts and flow charts. So being able to see that one donor is going to trickle down to their own collection. And there could definitely be multiple collections if a donor donates a first series of works from 1999, and then they make another donation in 2010. That might warrant two different collections, and you would show the difference in those in the dates or your accession numbers. But in general, this is a simple chart to follow. When we talk about processing, here, I'll move my little screen here. There we go. When we talk about processing, that's a very broad umbrella term for many individual actions that are going to happen. But in general, it is the process from beginning to end, from raw materials given by your donor to the end product when everything is nice and tidy and rehoused and labeled and tucked away in archives, nice and safe. This is everything that falls in the in-between. And these don't necessarily have to happen in one order or another, but everything you see on the timeline does have to happen before we get to the digitizing and public access aspect. And that is in everyone's best interest. The last thing that you want is to put it out there that you have a collection and then someone comes to you looking for a specific thing and you realize you don't know if you actually have that specific thing because you haven't been through and done the full arrangement of the collection. So you don't actually know what you have yet. So it's always best to sort everything out internally before welcoming the public into it. It'll make everything much tidier in the end. So these steps, in no particular order, we're going to have arrangement, description, preservation, and appraisal. Now I'll start with appraisal because off the bat, I feel like a lot of people hear the word appraisal and they think of auction houses and giving a monetary value, and you want to hear all these big numbers. In archives, generally, we're not talking about a monetary value. We're more so appraising it for what it does in comparison to our collecting goals. Why would we want to have this collection or this object? What does that object say about us? What can we say about that object? Are we the best people to house this object? In many cases, especially when it comes to tribal museums, repatriation is a huge effort right now. We are very happy to own up to when we are not the correct people to own an item. And repatriation happens, far from just archives. This is an entire, that's a whole can of worms. Preservation is something that happens little by little in many stages, but mostly it's the act of quite literally putting things in folders and making sure things aren't contaminated. Throughout that process, we're also removing any contaminants. So that includes any metals, any adhesives. Yes, you have to take out every staple and every sticky note. We don't want any of those staying in the collections. Paper clips, all of those, any metals are going to rust and it's going to get nasty and it's just going to cause bigger problems down the road. So instead of using those fasteners, that's what would end up in a folder in and of itself. Description also tends to happen towards the end, but sometimes you jump back and forth depending on your personal workflow. Description normally happens through what we call a finding aid, which we'll go through a full structure of later on, but it kind of serves as a roadmap. That'll be your cheat sheet to the entire collection once you're done with it. And arrangement is also something that's kind of going to happen a little bit of everywhere. That's going to be the specific order in which we are organizing the collection. A lot of times we'll talk about this concept of original order. That indicates that the donor had done some amount of organizing before donating. Sometimes it's as simple as, the donor put these materials in the same box as each other. So that's some form of original order. That's showing some amount of unconscious organization on the donor's part. And you have to consider maybe there's a possibility that we should respect that original order. In some cases, donors have done a lot of work to it. I've worked with collections where everything's already in 3-ring binders and all I have to do is rehouse it into folders and better materials. But in that case, there's also the complete opposite as well, where things are thrown into Stop and Shop bags and you have no idea where things have necessarily come from or in what order they were intended to be looked at. After all of that is done, you can get onto the fun digitizing public parts. That's where you kind of give up your personal attachment to the collection and get it back to the public, get it back to the people who are really going to use it.
That's a question.
Absolutely.
So if you get a donation.
Yes.
And you said are you physically keeping that donation all together?
Yes.
So it's not just that that's how it's labeled.
No, it stays together the entire time. As much as we can control that, obviously if there are, to everything, there's going to be exceptions to the rules. Say there's a donation and processing a collection right now, so I'm looking over at the materials that I'm talking about. Say there's a book in that collection that needs some serious restoration work, and for whatever reason, we determine that it would be worth it to send it off for conservation efforts. In that instance, you can pull things, but for the most part, we want everything to stay together as much as possible. It also helps just with workflow control as we're transporting things around the building. If things, go off to get frozen and then they're going upstairs or they're going to a different workroom, keep everything together as much as possible.
Well, I was gonna say, would there ever be like kind of cultural, I guess, reasons why something shouldn't be with, needs to be with something else, or a reason that might, I don't know, things might need to be.
Well, yeah, do we need to consider that order from the donor sacrosanct, especially when I know in our group we're dealing with just piles of stuff.
Yeah.
So they're definitely, I don't think there's an order. We may find an order as
you're going
go through, but it also might not be an order that we deem appropriate culturally or
yeah, definitely. You take everything with a grain of salt, and I'll say every collection is going to be a little bit different. And there comes a point where you just have to use your best judgment and your common sense and your knowledge of the institution that you're working with and the materials that you're working with. A lot of times we'll get, so like if we're getting all the papers from one person's office, sure, it's a lot of papers, but maybe every so often there's a vase or there's, a piece of artwork. And if I determine this object is just unruly for me to physically store up in archives, I would transfer ownership of that down to collections. So it turns into a museum collections object, but in all of the descriptions of it, it's going to have a note that says it's part of an archives collection. It's just being stored in a physically different place because of the physical limitations. Say it's a big unruly object, and I just don't have, storage racks that big.
It makes sense because then you're sort of tracking that.
Yes.
You have that trail.
Yes. The documentation of everything in instances like that is what's going to keep everything nice and tidy. Obviously, this also depends on the scale of your institution. Like around here, we would have specific forms for transferring that, and it would go into the databases. But in some places, it's as easy as just making a note of it in the finding aid in the end. And I'll show you what the finding aids look like moving forward. That goes to say as well, when it comes to exhibiting, when someone donates items like that, there are conditions of that donation. If someone can donate something to us and say, I don't want anyone to see this for 100 years, and we'll honor that. That's absolutely totally normal and feasible. You can say, I don't want this item photographed. I don't want it on exhibit. We'll put it in the vault and it won't see daylight for 100 years if that's what the donor wants. So especially when it comes to culturally sensitive items, there's plenty of things that are restricted that won't go on exhibit because of what it means, that shouldn't go on exhibit because of what it means, or just because it's too personal. Like it could even just be letters, from a mother to a daughter, and someone saying, I don't think I want this online. I don't want this digitized. That's absolutely normal and a very valid want of a donor as well. So our aim is to accommodate as many of those needs as possible and be here as a physically safe place for those materials to make sure that they last that 100 years. Because in a basement, in a home, who knows what could happen? But here we're able to control everything down to the degree that the room is in, to make sure that in 100 years, those letters, those photos are still able to be shared. Yeah, so I guess to jump back into it, risk management strategies are something that we think about a lot here at the museum, but they might be something that you don't always think about at home, where you're just concerned about, what temperature is comfortable for you. But there are temperatures that are comfortable for different materials. And this gets very specific if you're interested in it. But if you want to know, in general, we tend to stick around 68 plus or minus degrees. And I like the humidity between 30 and 50. Around here, since Connecticut kind of gets a little bit of every type of weather, we'll have a few really hot days and we'll have some freezing days. It becomes a lot about learning your space as well, and where your space physically is inside your building also has a big impact. Light exposure is something that you can easily avoid light exposure by just keeping things in boxes. That's honestly one of the big points that we go by here. If it can fit in a box, we might as well put it in a box. But on a larger scale, there are ways to make daylight a little safer. There's UV blocking sleeves, and there's window film that you can put on top of windows that helps block harmful rays from coming in. Some folks also do this just in their homes to reduce fading of their furniture. This is something that happens at many different scales, not just here in archives. And again, water damage, when we're talking about where we are physically putting our collections, if you have to put a box in your home, we're going to try to avoid putting it by pipes and water lines, and in your bathroom. You probably shouldn't do that, or in the basement. The attic is probably prone to some leaks. So just being aware of where you're putting that box of family heirlooms is always special.
You think the attic's prone to what?
Leaking, roof leaks.
Yeah.
Pest management also goes along with that. Here in the institutional level, we have what we call IPMs, Integrated Pest Management Strategies. That is a list of rules for the entire building that everyone who comes into the building and works in the building has to follow. Here at the Pequot Museum, we have very strict rules about plants, flowers. We host a lot of events here at the museum that don't have anything to do with the museum, and we have our preferred list of vendors who are cool with us and follow our rules. And if someone decides to leave a bunch of flowers in the building longer than they're allowed to, they probably won't be invited back to the building. We take it very seriously. And this is where there's going to be gross pictures of mold. I'm sorry. So active versus inactive mold. When you see active mold, I'm sure a lot of you're going to know that something's wrong the second that you see it. It's going to look smushy and fuzzy and gross, and you're not going to want to do anything with it to begin with. Inactive is where we can actually clean it. Obviously, there's a lot of text here. You don't have to read it all. These are ways to stop mold growth before you go to clean it, because you cannot clean it while it's active. It'll just make a mess. It'll be very obvious that you're doing something wrong if you try to do it anyways. Cleaning it, more about cleaning it. HEPA, these are just ultra filtered vacuums that get really, really tiny particles. They're a little bit stronger than your regular, household vacuum, though a lot of them nowadays, technology is amazing. I'm sure a lot of us know what water damage looks like. Rings of condensation on paper from where someone put a coffee cup down on top of it. Water damage is obviously quite irreversible. So waiting until the object has dried to move it, or you have to proceed with caution. Paper is its most fragile when it's wet. I'm sure you've all felt, paper just crumble underneath you when you go to pick it up. But it can also bleed the ink. And in that case, you might be destroying information. Whereas sometimes, a document can get wet, and if the ink doesn't run, for all intents and purposes, you can still read it. It just becomes a little bit more fragile. You have to be a little bit more aware of how you're picking it up. Pest damage is another one that's going to appear in many different forms. This is another one where you might have to look a little bit closer, because it could just look like wear and tear at first, but then you look closer and realize there are little teeny tiny holes everywhere, or there's dust that at first looks like dust, but then you look closer and it's not dust. It's little pellets, or frass is what we call the dust or powdery substance from bugs. And the deterioration of them can be subtle at first, or it can look like, a worm has gone directly through the book and it'll be a very obvious hole. A little bit of everything there. This, on the other hand, is completely fine. Foxing, which is on right over here, that's like the little dark marks you see all over. Kind of think of it like age spots on a piece of paper. Totally normal. It's going to happen. For the most part, it doesn't feel any different on the page. On that example, you also see marks from it being creased over the years. We try to store things flat as much as possible, so we're not storing anything folded up, because this is what's going to happen. You're going to get weak points in the paper. You'll be able to see clear lines where this was once folded up very small. And then on the other side, this is efflorescence. This is just salt deposits, salt crystallization on books. It can happen depending on humidity. And my internet connection is unstable too. Why not? But that's totally normal. It'll appear very different than mold because of how flaky and crystallized it is. Just think about like table salt, very similar. So processing. So this is where we're going to start getting into what you do when you face a room full of boxes and papers. and everything seems overwhelming and you're not sure where to start. And it can be overwhelming. That is a completely valid feeling. And I promise everybody who works in museums and archives has also felt that feeling, no matter what scale we're talking about. Even if you have all the resources in the world, you are going to get overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that you have eventually. Before you even get into it, you should do a general environment check. Make sure there's no stagnant water, making sure there's no active leaks. You don't want to open that can of worms and start moving things out of there and then realize that there's mold in there. And now you've moved moldy materials into a not moldy room and contaminated even more. So a broad approach at first. And then separating materials by donor is a good way to get started as well, because that will help you identify your collections. So suddenly a room full of things becomes 4 little piles. And okay, here are your 4 collections. And now things seem a little bit more manageable. Also going back to original order, being aware that bags next to each other might have a relation. And then at the very least, if you have absolutely no indication of where stuff came from, no hints towards who donated it or when, complete bottom up, you might have to start just going paper by paper, which sounds stressful, and it is. It's not fun. But the nice thing about this method is that you can weed out materials very quickly in this process. As you're going through things, it's going to be obvious when the donor just didn't look at what they were donating. Like if someone was donating all of the materials from their father's office, they might have quite literally dumped the drawers out into a bag and handed it to you. And you're going to get manuals from computers that don't exist anymore and printer manuals and extra printer paper and cell phone bills and bank statements, things that you don't actually need. And those can all go. And then now that pile suddenly feels a little less daunting because you realize it's not everything that you need to actually retain. It definitely makes the mountain feel a little bit smaller. So this is a little bit more about hierarchy of how you can organize collections. So when you go into a single collection, again, say it's the Emma Kushman papers, and say I have 2 very distinct collecting areas. I have all the books I read in high school and all of my work-related research. You might want to separate those because it'll be easier to find information within those series if you separate them. And then underneath that, in theory, you could go on and create tons of subseries and tons of series. But you want to be careful that you're not making things too redundant. Really, each layer here should help describe the overall story being told in the collection. For example, there was a collection I processed that was donated. This was another institution, but it was donated by a Vietnam veteran. And he very clearly had papers from his time at the Coast Guard Academy, his time in Vietnam, and his time after Vietnam. In order to best describe things and best organize things, there were 3 clear series that came out of that collection. And then underneath those, you just arrange things chronologically. Depending on the amount of materials, it might not be that hard to do in the first place. But each layer should help you understand something about the overall collection. You want to be careful, adding too many layers to things. It could just confuse you even more. So finding aids. This is going to be, a finding aid is a single document that serves as your roadmap to a collection. If you're looking at it from an outside perspective, someone who has no idea what this material is should be able to look at the finding aid and know all the important information on it. They should be able to know where it's held, who to contact to see the information. They should know why it's important, the subject matters that are included in this. And you, as the owner of this collection, should be able to reference it to see things like the extent of the collection. How many boxes are we talking about? What year was it acquired? Who donated it? Specific names. There's going to be a full inventory in here as well. So once we get to things like a box list, so if this was me and I saw that box number 1 in this collection had all these folders in it, that means I could go upstairs, I could pull box number 1, go 4 folders in and know exactly what's going to be in that folder. And if someone requests that specific information, I know exactly where to find it and how to pull it. that also benefits everything else in this collection because I'm not exposing it as often as if I had to go through the entire collection to find a specific folder. So in the end, it makes it easier for you. You're managing your time better. You're more efficient when you're trying to find something. And it's nicer on the materials because you're not constantly pulling them out and rifling through them. It feels very nice at the end when you have it all, documented. It can be a long process. These inventories can turn into, 20 page, 30 pages of just file level inventories. It can be a lot. It's worth it in the end, I promise. And in here as well, you also get like scope and content notes and history notes. So you get to talk a little bit about why this collection is significant in the grand scheme of history, why it was donated, why your collecting institution thinks it's important. Everything, all the background on it should end up in here. Which this also serves really when researchers come in as well. This is also a good way to quote unquote advertise your collection as well, to put it out there that this is what you have, and all of the subjects down here are also going to help researchers determine, if they're doing research on a specific subject and they see that a collection has that specific subject listed, they might suggest, they might want to look at it. So it could go even farther than just what's important to you and what's important to the donor. You never know where the finding aid could end up. Finally, this is like the last big section before we get into me showing you guys what we have. We're going to show you some materials that we use at the museum versus what you can use at home. This is a little disclaimer. A lot of people will throw around the word archival, but that's not really regulated. So anybody could call anything archival. What you're really looking for is where it's like acid-free, buffered, you're looking for cotton. And really, this is all just making sure that the materials don't have any harmful acids in them that are going to deteriorate over time. Chances are your object, or whatever you have, already has acid in it, and it's already going to deteriorate naturally over the years. So you just want to make sure that whatever you are putting it in isn't adding to that in any way. So this is some of the stuff that we use here. Obviously, folders and boxes are our bread and butter. Individual folders are going to be great for labeling. I personally like to use legal and full tab folders. It gives you the most space to write. And the legal folder size is like the extra long paper. You can fit more material, like different sized materials in it. And letter sized materials can always fit into legal, whereas legal sized stuff won't fit into letter. So I find it's a little more flexible, especially if we're ordering bulk stuff here at the museum. We want to order the most flexible materials. Interleaving paper is something I'll show you guys some great examples of. But if anything, I'd say this is a really good place to splurge a little bit. You can get things like this at Staples, folders that aren't necessarily advertising themselves as archival or acid-free, but then you can use the archival buffered leafing paper as something to put in between your materials and the folder. So you're kind of making a little sandwich with your materials so that you're still protecting it, but you don't necessarily have to go and spend, $60 on a box of folders. And that's always nice. So these banker boxes, these are something we use at the museum. I've got one on the card over here to show you. The plastic file boxes are nice if you have to store them in an area that you're not 100% sure about water exposure. If you have to put something on the floor in your basement, if that's what you have to do, then that's what you have to do. And things like plastic will help protect it. So even if an inch of water comes up in your basement, your documents are still going to be okay in there. It's a good extra safety precaution. So we're talking about photo albums. These are some examples of photo albums that are available through actual archival materials providers. And these are actually a pretty decent, for the price of it, I'd say this is something that's totally attainable for like family photos, things like that. But you're also not risking, adhesives or light damage with these. Again, there's a certain amount of, water. When you think about water damage, there's an inevitability. Stuff like this isn't airtight by any means, but it's definitely more robust and definitely a better solution than like you mentioned, those sticky backs. We don't want any adhesives on your photos in general. These are all going to be like little sleeves that you put them in, nice and tidy. Nothing's going to hurt your photos in there. I mentioned taking off adhesives and taking out staples. A lot of times I've seen like the little staple removers before that kind of look like a pair of teeth. Those are going to rip your paper. So if you're okay with ripping your paper, that's fine. But what we end up doing here at the museum is using little spatulas to individually lift each side of the staple and then extract it. So ideally, all you get left in the paper are just the two little punctures, like little vampire teeth on the corner of your paper. Ideally, not ripping the corner off, but sometimes it's inevitable. Sometimes that staple has already rusted through and the page already looks, crippled at the end. Sometimes you can't help it. But these are just some examples of tools that you can use. Anything that's metal is going to be nice, something that you can sanitize just in case it comes into contact with a little something funky. Metal's always a safe bet. And then your climate. Obviously, there's an example here of something you can put around fluorescent lights. That's kind of like a really big example if you're looking to, change an entire room into a more light safe environment. But that's a really broad example. Something that is a little bit more attainable though. I love these digital readers. These are fantastic to have around. I always recommend getting the multiple packs too, because there is a margin of error in some of these. You can have two of them right next to each other and one's showing 75 and one's showing 74. So having a couple around the space that you have your collections in and then taking, the median of them, you'll get a feel for your room too. Once you start paying attention to this side of things, you'll know what's normal for your space and what isn't normal for your space. Finally, there's a handy little water sensor here too. A lot of people just use these in their basements by, their boilers to begin with, completely separate from archiving purposes. And then there's two examples of window films as well. These are really handy too, because some of them they're not adhesive based. They're like a static. So you mist your window with water and then you like squeegee this on. So they're renter friendly as well. If you don't own your space, if you're in an office space that you want to protect, but you have a big window and you need the natural light sometimes. Like in here, we have all these big, beautiful natural lights and all these windows. All of this glass is treated. This is all protected glass. So those are some big examples. I have a bunch of links here. These are all going to be in the PowerPoint I can send out to you guys. These are further readings. This will get into the nitty gritty of it. If you are really concerned about one aspect of things, these are some great links that go really deep into them. So from here, we're going to move on to some real examples, some fun examples. We're going to gather around this table here. We're going to have cotton gloves. These are they're pretty self-explanatory, but one's going to be cotton-based, one's going to be a latex or a nitrile, medical examination gloves versus something a little bit softer. Really, the goal in theory of any glove is to separate your natural oils from the materials you're picking up. But honestly, nothing is going to be clean, dry hands. One of my professors once gave me the analogy of imagine trying to pick up tissue paper while wearing mitts. Mm-hmm. You're going to lose a lot of dexterity in your hands and in your fingers when you are using any sort of glove like that, but especially cotton gloves. So a lot of times, as long as you are being cognizant of what you're picking up, I just douse myself in sanitizer. Your hands will you will not find anybody whose hands are more dry than librarians and archivists. The amount that I have to sanitize. Oh yeah, that's true. Okay. Medical. Okay. I guess. Clean, dry. The amount that we're handling things is ideally also low enough that we're not actually exposing anything for such long degrees of time. So we're going to talk about a few different forms of boxes. You're going to see a lot of clamshells, which is this style of box. I'm going to try to show it in such a way. So it kind of opens up and it folds open. So you can have the box completely open. It should sit up on its own. We have some of our pop culture materials in here. If you wanted to know what a Pepsi can advertising, some of our events is like, you never know what's going to be in pop culture boxes. But again, just an example of how things are stored. These items are small enough that I'm okay with them being upstairs in archives as opposed to being down in museum collections. But if it gets any bigger than like something you can physically pick up on your own, like I'd want to be able to pick up anything that I have in archives. If it's bigger than that, I'm not going to pick it up anyways, so it's not going to be in archives. Another one that's fun to talk about are postcards. So again, very similar type of box. This is like a shoebox, basically. But you can fit so many postcards into a box like this. And ideally, this is also a good place to talk about encapsulation. So that is where you have your materials encapsulated in these clear sleeves so that, actually I can see what that too. So you get full access to seeing the item, but you can also hold it. You don't have to be worried about touching it because you're not actually touching the object. This is a great way to have items on display as well. Chances are if you're seeing a document on display, it's already going to be behind some form of glass. But if you have any books out, anything like that, they're going to be covered to begin with. But this is a great way to get people handling objects, you know.
What about cataloging photographs this way?
Yep. Yes, that's absolutely. All of these are cataloged like photographs. So they all have individual numbers on them. Some of them have little cards. This just shows that it's been on exhibit before, but all of them are going to have, let me try to show individual labels. You might not be able to see that. Most of the time there's a very faint, we write on the individual object. This doesn't always happen. Really depends on each little object, but that's just a tiny little identifying number. Smaller items like this, where there's going to be tons of them in a box, you might label like that. I've worked with fashion collections where we label individual shoes and you try to label it in such a way, in such a place where it doesn't impact the understanding of the object or the visualization of the object. Ideally, you don't want to see it at all. So the less you see, the better. If you can't tell that it's been numbered, they're probably doing a good job at numbering. I love seeing just the mass amount of stuff that can fit in these is fantastic. It takes, you know, a collection that looks like it's thousands of items is really just a handful of that.
Is that a specific type of paper that you slide in there with all the writings on it? Because it's
the
postcard?
Yes, yeah. It's just any of our, like, you'll see other things that are made up of this paper as well. It's like it's a double ply interleafing paper. So it's just a thicker version of interleaf stuff that I'll show you in a minute. Interleafing is normally like tissue paper thin, but you can get thicker plies of it. Yeah, ply is a good word for it. To where you can actually write on it and mark it a little bit easier. In general, though, interleaving would be kind of hard to write on because it would just here. This is an example of a single document that I didn't make this. This was here before I started, but this casing is handmade specifically for this document. So from the outside, you can't really tell what's in it. Nothing is going to fall out from any side of it. The tie is kind of just there to keep them closed. It's going to be stored flat anyways. But still, you would have no indication that anything could possibly fall out from here. This is where you'll see a lot of interleaving in here. This is sheet music, but this is that interleaving paper. This can be really thin, tissue papery. Again, in this case, it just helps reduce friction, gives it some sort of padding between the actual documents and the cardboard. But here, what we've done, and if you come from the side of it too, you can kind of see how they put additional layers of cardstock on the side so that the document kind of sits down into the casing so that even when this lid is on, neither side of the lid is actually touching the document because you got a little bit of that padding around it. Again, tons of layers of interleaving here. And that just folds like that. And you get the full document. And this is also the preferred way of storing things like this because you can display it without ever touching it. So if someone did just want to see it, or if you needed to take a picture of it or reference it, this is a way to view it, but not ever need to touch it. So again, when we're thinking about our hands, ideally, you never really need to touch the object to begin with. So a glove in this case would just be hard to pick up and pinch individual little pieces of interleaf. So again, very crafty. If there's a single document that you're that concerned about keeping safe, this is definitely a great little handmade if you're crafty. And again, it becomes super stable. Like even if you try to get this thing out, you probably want to be able to. Not everything in our collections is necessarily boxed. I'll be the first to admit that sometimes there are just going to be books on shelves. This set as well. This is like a Sotheby's catalog, but some things like this are just going to be on the shelves like this, mostly because they're robust enough or new enough that there's no real risk in handling it. Sometimes that doesn't even have anything to do with age. This is a National Geographic from 1914, and it is just bound so well and had been handled so little that this book is still very robust. She's hefty. This isn't going anywhere. Yeah. So again, and the light exposure aspect of things, these are on shelves that quite literally never see light. These are things that all of our shelves have censored lights on it, so the lights won't even turn on until you're actively walking into the aisle that they're in. So if you never go into the aisle. So this is more examples of individual cases. Again, these are all things that were made especially for this size. So these are kind of wonky sizes, things that aren't necessarily standard, like letter sized or legal sized. So these are weird little things that, like this one, is a teeny tiny book. So you get the bigger case for it. And having the bigger case in this instance, so even though the book is only that big, the reason we put it in something this big is because it's going to get lost. It's much easier to keep track of something that is this size as opposed to something that is that size. Something like this could easily fall off the back of a shelf and you would never know because it's tiny. It's an index card. It's like a credit card. It's just very small. Something like this is going to sit on the shelf a lot nicer too. You're going to be able to have space for your labels, space for barcodes. You know, you get a little bit more information that way, but it's like putting a really big obnoxious keychain on your keys.
You're creating a standard size for it.
Yes.
Whereas like if it's a non-standard size and too small and it doesn't fit, then you're going to risk it.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Again, even though this is the same size, this is just another method that you'll see documents stored in. So you open it the first way, and then you have these multiple layers that fold out on either side. So you have 2 that fold horizontally and 2 that fold vertically. So you kind of get this lotus opening. So even though there are no adhesives, there's no ties, there's no Velcro in this one, there's no contamination other than the paper. There's so many layers of paper that it ends up holding it in place. And again, you can put the object out on display short term without ever having to touch it. Very handy. Just fold everything back over. Like that. Again, it won't fall out no matter where you turn it because there's so many layers. This little one, and another instance of a weird shaped object. This particular one, I believe this is the Webster. This is a Webster dictionary from 1939. Weird size, weird shape, not great condition. So on top of it being in its initial box, which has Velcro in this case to keep it closed, you also have the cotton tie on it. Cotton ties, because this box probably wouldn't stay together on its own. This particular book is quite literally coming apart at the seams. It had been rebound at some point, not very well, so it comes apart quite easily. This is if you're interested, this is a special edition dictionary that was printed especially for schools and banks. So it's that half size, so it fits into little desks and offices easier. But yeah, the additional cotton tie in here is what I wanted to highlight for a little bit more stabilization than just folding it into further pieces. And again, the Velcro little thing, you can get these at Staples, honestly, the little Velcro dots. As long as it's not touching, it doesn't come into contact with the materials, you have really 2 extra layers of protection between that. So you don't have to worry about that adhesive. I wouldn't worry about that to begin with. Another example of stuff that doesn't necessarily need a box are things where the box kind of built in. So this one on top. This is a facsimile. A facsimile is a reproduction of a book or document that is made to look as close as possible to the original. So it's like a forgery, but you're admitting that it's not real. You're being transparent about it. That's the only difference between forgeries and facsimiles. Yes, intent. If you're being honest about it, you're cool. But again, in this instance, the case for it is built into the total package. The presentation involves the case, and then this is the actual book. Again, it has the cotton ties on one side as an additional informational pamphlet in there. In this case, I wouldn't bother putting this into another box. It's robust enough. This one is a photo album example. You've probably seen binders like this around, but the binder just comes in its own sleeve. So in this instance, yeah, you can kind of see that. You just pop it on its side. There's a little pull tab. Normally you would have it up like this on a shelf, and then you have the little pull tab that comes out. Then you have the box and the binder. And it's like that. This is all photos from early construction of the museum, actually. So again, another example where I wouldn't put this in another box. That's just bothersome.
And then those sleeves with the plastic for the photos
Yes.
wouldn't be maybe what I'd go buy at a craft store, but they.
Probably not. I want a little bit more reassurance that it's not, because really they're just polypropylene. It's a plastic sleeve. Not all plastic is created equal. There are definitely cheap plastics out there. You'd want some reassurance that it's not going to warp over time or yellow over time. The light exposure is pretty low in a case like this, but still, if you put it 200 years later.
So thinking of that earlier example where my family photos,
Yes.
I want to keep within my family,
Yes.
but I want them not in
Yeah. Here, actually, I should
stuck
show.
down with tape
No.
or
Adhesives.
behind a
Oh my gosh.
plastic.
Adhesives will quite literally eat your material from the inside out. There are albums of Skip Hayward had these huge books of clippings back from early like 70s and 80s. Any mention of Pequots or Mohegans, he'd clip out the newspapers and paste it in and glue it right in. They're all basically dust now because you go to open it and the adhesive has gone through newspaper because the newspaper is awful too. What? They're working against us, I swear. But yeah, so these sleeves, these are individual little sleeves. I believe these open on the inside, yes. So these, again, you can double them up, but there's nothing contaminating this. And that also goes into the theory that, and this is also kind of a theory with conservation work as well, that everything we should do should be reversible. So there is nothing that I would do to any of our materials that couldn't be undone 10 years from now if they come across some amazing scientific, development, and here's this new way to preserve photographs. I wouldn't want anything that I do to impede them from doing better work in the future. That's also something that, art conservation, that's where most of that comes from, but it's a good general rule as well. It's also why we always use pencils, because pencils are reversible. You can erase a pencil. And in general, pencils are going to be less risk of ink bleeding everywhere. So as far as boxes go, boxes will come in just about any size you can imagine. These are all different forms of the same type of clamshell box that we were talking about earlier. Again, unfolds. This is what you're going to have inside of that when the clamshell box opens. Oh, that's actually a pretty good view. Opens up like that. And again, this should be an instance where it could stand up on its own. Ideally, if you're gonna go through it standing up, it should have the ability to stand up on its own. You don't want it to risk accidentally tipping over. If not, you should have enough room here to be able to pull stuff out. This is actually another good example of encapsulation. Let me find something cool. This is a 10-pound note from 1759. in case you wanted to see one. Another example of encapsulation where this is a little sleeve. And this one has a sticker on the outside. That sticker was actually left by the auction company that the museum purchased these off of. If we were doing this again, I might not, if I were rehousing these, I might not want to do it that way, but it's been on there so long at this point, they also don't, it's not worth it to go through and try and change all of them. But again, these are just little pockets. You could take it out of there. I'm not going to touch it because I don't have to. Encapsulation refers to anything being stored between two little pieces, a little sleeve. Technically, those photo albums are all encapsulation too. And having the sticker on the outside technically isn't harming the materials inside, so. Especially something of this size, something that tiny. Yeah, that's what encapsulation is. Again, these boxes come in just about any size. This one is actually a book. So this is another situation where the book was so fragile that we had to do additional stuff inside of the box. So it looks like a big box on the outside. There's all these structures inside that are made to hold the book in place because it's honestly too fragile to store any other way. So not only does this have some of that tan cardstock on the outside of it, I'll put this out for you. Not only the tan cardstock, it's also got that cotton ribbon. And inside of it, it also has an additional piece of cardstock to keep it from flopping over when it's inside the box. So all of this is in an effort to reduce the amount of friction that the paper sees, because friction is what's eventually going to cause the damage. Light exposure is, again, pretty low in a piece like this. Honestly, the light exposure isn't the thing that's causing the most damage. It's the friction and the quality of the paper just deteriorates over time. This is one of the banker boxes I was talking about. These are super handy because you can fit a massive amount of materials inside of it. And this is another, actually an example where labeling comes in handy because you have so much in here that making sure that you are labeling things in a clear and concise manner that still gives a decent amount of information. These are those folders that I showed you where they're legal sized, full tab. Sometimes they'll just have like a little corner or a third tab. I like having the whole space to write in. But again, stuff like that is personal preference. If you do this enough times, you'll get in the habit of writing a certain way. And this is also an example of why I like the legal sized things too. Like this booklet would not have fit in here if it was a letter sized folder, or I would have had to store it upright, and this is going to cause damage, that turning of it, whereas that amount, not going to be as damaging. All about risk management. This is just an example of a slightly oversized box. I don't even think it'd be much to show on camera. This is an example of something that's in between. These are just miscellaneous folders in here, but this is an example of a folder that we made from that same tan cardstock material. Folders, obviously you can buy them that smaller size. You can also make them. Everything that we have in the map cases, even if it's ginormous, does still have a folder on it. And that is so much, it's not so much that the folder isn't there to necessarily protect what's inside it because it's already in a drawer that's protecting it. The folder's there for us. When we go to take it out, I don't want to reach into a drawer and pull on a map and pull on that piece of paper. I want to hold on to it and hold on to the folder and be able to get a better grip on something so I'm not just tugging on paper. So it's just as much, more so in that case for us. Film can be a very hostile material. You don't really want to touch it. It's gonna smell nasty. It's gonna deteriorate in really weird ways. So this is an example of some of our film, The Witness, that's showing downstairs. We have dozens and dozens of these rolls, and we keep them in what was provided to us from the manufacturer. In this case, I'm not going to do anything additional with this. We know what it is just based on the labels on the outside. I don't even think that this is sessioned as individual objects. It's accessioned as the Witness film. You know, this is a 65 millimeter film. Yes. So it's probably accessioned just in there as the Witness 65 millimeter, and then it probably says what shelf it's on. It doesn't even say how many rolls there are, because at this point, we don't use this anyways. This isn't something that gets pulled for research, because it's all digitized now. You know, we have it on computers. We don't actually need this. But nonetheless, good to have, and having it in the manufacturer's container also assures that it's staying the way that the manufacturer wanted it, and they know the most about the materials that they're making, so we're not going to mess with it. Film is also something that can be extremely flammable. This is an example of what a completely raw donation looks like. So this is part of that same donation that I showed you in the banker box. This is what material looks like when we have done nothing to it. I've done nothing to this except put it in a freezer bag and frozen. We freeze everything that comes into the building, regardless of where it comes from. If it's going to go up into archives, it's been frozen downstairs first. That assures that there's no mold growth, nothing like that, no active pests. So all I have to do is clean it, dust things off if you come across anything. So that's what this bag is. That's our freezer bag. It's marked with the date that it went in. Yeah, so that's, as you can see here, there's everything from binders and things that are already bound. In cases like this, so like with this has this plastic binding on it. In theory, this is okay, but since it's so small, I'll probably just rip it out of the binding. Plus there's a lot of unnecessary stuff in here too. Like that's not actually doing anything for me. And the back page isn't doing anything for me. It's just taking up space. And you might see it and think that's only 2 sheets of paper. How much space is that actually taking up? Over time, you have 20 boxes like that. You want to get rid of what's not serving you actively. Same thing with 3-ring binders. We don't like 3-ring binders for documents. When they're in sleeves, like with the photo albums, and there's an additional layer, so your materials aren't actually being hole punched for the 3 rings. That's one thing, but in general, we don't want to be putting unnecessary holes in documents. So yeah, that's everything that. Oh, actually, no, I have a round one. So that long box. This might be kind of hard to show on that. I'm not even going to pull it all the way out. But this is a blueprint from the museum. It's rolled in there, and at this point, it has been rolled for so long that flattening it could not only hurt the paper, because at this point, the paper has so much memory of being wound that tightly, it might not want to lay flat at this point. We might risk, dimpling it or creating a little, like, not necessarily a tear, but like friction, a little friction knot in it. So keeping it rolled up, especially once we know what it is, once it's labeled, we know what's in there if it needs to be referenced. Maybe we'll scan it once. It's probably gonna be hard to scan it if it's super tightly rolled up, but we'll do it once and then put it back in here and just let it stay rolled. Because at this point, that's all it knows and that's all it wants to do. So then you end up with these really long, skinny boxes, which again, pretty sure you can buy them like this. In theory, you could also make it just like you could make those smaller boxes, and these are tons of sizes. There's, massive long ones, there's really wide ones. The lengths we will go to keep something rolled, if it's already rolled, we'll do whatever it takes, as opposed to when it's folded. Something that's folded, we ideally don't ever want folded again, but rolled is a little bit different. Thank you guys so much for coming. This was honestly a big trial run. I know that when we started having these conversations about doing this in person, the thing that stuck out to me most is the fact that some people have no idea where to start. And some people genuinely have no clue what to do. And just the thought of boxes sitting in basements breaks my heart. even stuff in attics and stuff in offices, being lost like that. So really just getting a hold of your materials and understanding what you have. And all archives is just a handful of tools, and how you use it, is up to you. It's up to your materials, it's up to your beliefs. I hope I provided some tools. Bye.